Research quality can feel complex, and knowing where to start is often the hardest part. Welcome to the Quality Assurance Podcast, where we bridge the gap between uncertainty and action with smart, simple, and sustainable solutions that actually work. This special 6-part series is brought to you by PRN Pharmaceutical Research Network, LLC, your partner in ophthalmic clinical research with built-in quality and compliance expertise. Welcome your host, Chris Milawski, alongside the CEO and co-founder of PRN, Jeanette Stewart, and quality assurance expert, Ashley Hehr.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. We're very, very happy that you're back. We're back again with Jeanette Stewart from PRN Pharmaceutical Research Network and our QA expert, Ashley Hehr. So good morning to you both. And today we're going to be talking about SOPs, standard operating procedures. So Ashley, why don't you give us a little bit of an imprimatur, if you will, on exactly the purpose, generation, content of SOPs. Tell us a little bit about SOPs from sort of a 30,000 foot view here.
Yeah, absolutely. So SOPs have been generated, as you said, stands for standard operating procedure. And what they are is a step-by-step procedure or process that outlines how to perform a task or task. And in our organization or in our industry, we use these to help support some of our regulatory requirements so that we can show inspectors, auditors, clients, anybody that needs to know how we are performing something that is expected within our organization. So we're looking at anything from quality assurance activities, audits, vendor qualification, to things that are specific to clinical operations or clinical monitoring, data management, stats. All of these organizations or groups within organizations should have standard operating procedures to show how they do things. And these standard operating procedures should support what they are actually doing.
Very
Ashley,
good.
you know how I think of them? It's like I really like to play in the kitchen. So I look at an SOP like a recipe, right?
Mhm.
If I want something to turn out the same every time, then I follow the recipe. My husband always teases me because a lot of times I don't. And so we get some product at the end that may or may not be great. If he likes
Yeah.
it better, he always says, "Well, I don't need to ask that you make it again because you'll never remember what you did," which is true. If you don't follow a procedure, you just don't know, right? So
Absolutely.
for me, that's the best analogy when I think about SOPs.
I might even tack on to that, Jeanette, and sit there because if you've done anything in the kitchen before as well as there's cooking and then there's baking, right? Cooking can be, I can open the fridge door, I've got all these things, I can whip something up, and that's really, really good. Baking is much more different. It's a very clear procedure on what you need to do. If you don't put the right amount of baking soda or baking powder in, it won't rise or it won't do what it needs to do. So I would probably say SOPs are going to be a little bit more towards the baking side of things than they're going to be the cooking side of things.
Good
As we were
point.
talking about earlier, you can either make make an SOP. You can make an SOP too loose, and then you can't actually follow the SOP. So it may turn out to be a great dish, but from an auditing perspective, it's not going to turn out to be that well. So, and which leads really into the next point when we think about it is if SOPs are so important and every company should have them, who's ultimately responsible for generating an SOP for an organization?
That is an excellent question, Chris. And, that's kind of something that I have found over the years when I have completed audits. I look to see who is the author of and who are the reviewers of these documents. And obviously, you want to make sure that people that are in executive leadership levels understand or know the processes that being followed. But when you look at the meat of documents and you talk to team members and you ask them, you know, who developed these SOPs? Did you have a say in this? Did you review these? Did you add comments in? Especially when I start talking to team members that are actually performing the task and they're not doing it the way the SOP states. So I have found that in some companies, they have team members that aren't actually performing the activities, performing the tasks, the process, the procedures, generating these SOPs for people that are actually doing them. That's a disaster.
Yeah.
That is a disaster waiting to happen, because what happens is that team members that are actually doing it are doing it the way they think they should be doing it, not
Yeah.
the way it's defined in the SOP, which opens up yourself for scrutiny during an inspection or an audit.
Yeah.
So my biggest takeaway in this is have the team members that are truly involved in doing the tasks, that are actively completing the monitoring visits, that are actively involved in case processing for safety, help in generating those SOPs that are around those specific topics.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Actually, I can't think of, anything more that kind of aligns with this as protocol writing. A lot, I'm involved in writing a lot of protocols for ophthalmic trials, and a lot of times it's what I call back room syndrome. You have people start adding things into the protocol. They actually have no idea what happens in clinic. So they add all these things that kind of sound nice, and this might be good to have, and you end up with a disaster, an absolute
Yep.
disaster. I think it's similar with SOPs. If the people writing
Yeah.
it don't actually know the logistical process that makes sense, then you
Yep.
end up with something that's not very helpful.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I mean, going along that, the baking and cooking analogy as well, I had said before that you can make an SOP too loose, and, then you're going to run into trouble, but you can also make an SOP, far too rigid and almost impossible to follow.
Yep.
Another analogy might be, having somebody who's never baked something before tell you how to bake that. They've never done it, so they don't really know. Or what's very popular right now is to try and find recipes online. Well, wherever you're finding online, something might have gotten left out. The person
Yep.
that put it in there didn't load it properly, or however you want to go. So, this is there's going to be a sweet spot for where your SOP it needs to be. So that's going to lead right into, we know what an SOP is. We've got an idea of who should be doing it. So ultimately, at this point, what are the components of a good SOP? What should companies and organizations be putting into their SOP so it can be ultimately followed by their staff members and the individuals who actually have to follow the SOP?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I look at an SOP, there's a couple components that I hone in on to make sure they're there. And you want them to be obviously a title that explains what the SOP is going to talk about. So, interim monitoring visit. That lets me know that this SOP is about an interim monitoring visit that is being conducted by your monitor or clinical research associate. Second is you want a purpose. You want a purpose statement that outlines the reason for the SOP. Why does this SOP exist? It's clarity. Then scope. The scope should define the boundaries of the SOP, not just what is included in an SOP, but what could also be excluded or not applicable in an SOP. And then what I think is one of the most important parts is roles and responsibilities. So truly defining the roles and their responsibilities within that process or procedure, really honing in on um, not just a statement to the effect of clinical operations. Well, there's a lot of things that fall under clinical operations. So who in clinical operations is responsible for XYZ? And then obviously your reference section, which some people kind of don't always put a lot of thought into, but what other SOPs, what other procedures, what forms, and what templates are associated or also applicable to that procedure? So, what could be cross referenced? You want to make sure that if something is associated with monitoring, your other SOPs associated with monitoring are also referenced there.
Yeah.
If there's a form, a template, a plan that should be used, you want to make sure those are referenced in there as well. So it's very clear what should be part of your deliverables. And then obviously the procedure section, the most important section of it all, which is your core recipe of what you're doing. And it should be clear, it should be concise, and it should be logically structured. And within that, there should be realistic timelines. So things that actually can be obtained, and then deliverables,
Yeah.
measurable deliverables. That is the meat of your SOP.
We're going to take a brief pause here for a quick note from our sponsor. You're watching the Quality Assurance Podcast, smart, simple, and sustainable solutions, brought to you by PRN Pharmaceutical Research Network, LLC. If you're finding these solutions helpful, don't miss an episode of this 6-part series. Hit that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform right now. Don't miss our downloadable show notes and freebies. Just click the link in the description to go directly to PRN's site to download the materials and get more information about the QA program, this episode, and other episodes as they become available. Now back to Chris, Jeanette, and Ashley.
Yeah. I like one of the things that you put in here. I'm going to touch upon that because you put in your notes. That your procedure is supposed to, I'm guessing, not really guessing. I mean, I do know, but you're trying to get your tangible evidence that a procedure is being followed. So,
Yep.
Just expound upon, so if somebody sees that, they're like, oh, tangible evidence. What does that really mean?
So what does that really mean? So when I look at an SOP and I read an SOP and they state something to the effect of, we're going to ensure our vendor is qualified. I am going to say, how? I'm going to want to know, how is the vendor qualified? What deliverable, what documents are you going to be able to produce to show me that you qualified your vendor? It's not just words, it's actually actions as well. So that's what I mean when I say measurable deliverables, things that can actually show that you did something.
Brilliant.
That's such a good point. Would like to add in one of my pet peeves when we come to actually reading the procedures themselves. And for me, I don't enjoy seeing things that are written in the passive. And
Mhm.
it shouldn't be, this is what you should do. It should be, you know, phone up the vendor, arrange a meeting,
Yeah.
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
ask them these questions, document their answers. It's almost like little commands, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but it should be actions that someone takes,
Yeah.
very simple, so they know exactly what's expected, so they can produce the deliverable that you're looking for,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Jeanette, you make the great point. And one of the ways to ensure that is have forms, templates, plans with already these pre-populated expected questions or pre-populated expected information that whoever is performing the task can then add to it with the responses that they received. And I think that's one thing that people don't really realize is how important having some standardized forms or templates help to keep things concise and keep everybody on the same page, so we're all collecting the same type of information and compare apples to apples.
Perfect.
So, Ashley, does that take away all forms of creativity?
Absolutely not. Because there's always going to be areas that you run into that you're going to have something as a one-off. And that's why I always say in these forms, they shouldn't be just yes, no questions. There should be areas for someone to add extra information. When I see a form and it's only yes, no, I actually question that a little bit because
Mhm.
I want to really know what was the response. So no, this is not just a one size fits all, but that's why you want to make sure your fields and within your forms are text fields that you can actually put in and
Mhm.
add some additional information.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
agree. As an auditor, when you look at it, that gives you confidence that they actually did it. And there's some variability that would be normal and expected, right? I
Yes.
think the other thing is in the SOP itself, it should say, use this template and it's okay to add to it. You might want to say, you can't take anything away in certain circumstances, but it's okay to
Right.
modify with additional information so that it's clear that that's permissible, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just because you have a form or template, I see a lot of these templates that have italicized lettering, and it states, you know, customized to as the vendor. So, say I'm doing a vendor qualification and this vendor is a safety vendor. Obviously, there are going to be areas that I talk to in a safety vendor when I'm qualifying them versus a data management vendor. So, you can make your forms and templates very customizable, but you want to make sure that the basic standard information is always being captured.
Yeah. Good point,
Yeah.
Ashley.
Excellent. Excellent. Actually, you've got another great comment here that I'm going to read because I really liked it in your notes here that, companies don't necessarily struggle with writing an SOP. Normally they're going to struggle with using and following the SOP. And again, it goes back to our original discussion about it's either too squishy on one end or it's too strict on the other end.
That's true.
But you go on to say they're either too long, maybe they've got complicated language. Jeanette mentioned using words such as, should or maybe. And the procedures, ultimately they'll either, fail to define the deliverable or the measurable activity. And going, to Jeanette's point about the should or maybes, there's always going to be instances where, again, maybe a particular topic might be a little squishy, where you're not really sure, and it may not apply to everybody. So I don't know. You should really, like in an SOP, you should shy away from, terms like, if applicable, or in certain instances this might be done, because everything has some wiggle room everywhere. There are certain things that must be done in a very specific way. But we'll harken back to our baking. You know what? If when you're done, cooking your bagel and you want to put sesame seeds on the top, you can do that. But if you're either allergic to them or you don't like them, you don't have to do that. The bagel's still going to taste okay.
Absolutely.
And I
Perfect.
want to be assigned to the group where you're talking about who has the roles and responsibilities. I want the taste tester responsibility, okay?
Taste tester's good. Yeah, that's a good one. I really, really like that as well. So excellent. Well, I believe we've got a really good primer here on SOPs and what they're about, why companies should be using them, and ultimately, I think you would both agree that companies shouldn't shy away from SOPs because it really does help define what they're doing. I think that the acronym SOP probably has some negative connotations that run around it through history. People thinking about, oh my gosh, I've got to stick to my standard operating procedure. But in all reality, if you can't define how you're going to do certain processes, there's no way you're going to be able to prove that the deliverable and the measurable outcome that you actually have is actually like validated. You really have you can't you can sit there and say, well, look at a great job we did, but if you didn't follow your own policies and procedures, going to more of an esoteric sort of like protocol level and the clinical operations protocol level, it's like, how are we going to be able to prove that the outcome of what you say is true is actually true if you didn't follow the protocol, you didn't follow the SOP?
Absolutely.
Yep. Very good. Well, thank you again, both of you, for joining us, and thank everyone for joining the podcast as well. We do appreciate it, and we will be back again with another installment of our PRN Quality Assurance podcast. So take care, everybody.
Thank you all. Bye for now.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Quality Assurance Podcast, a 6-part series dedicated to making research quality smart, simple, and sustainable. Our thanks to Jeanette Stewart and Ashley Hehr for their expertise, and to our sponsor, PRN Pharmaceutical Research Network, LLC, for making this series possible. Be sure to tune in to the next episode as we tackle the industry's QA challenges and offer ideas you can actually use. Smart, simple, and sustainable.